After the collapse of the Soviet Union, post-punk's popularity in Eastern Europe would largely decrease. This does not mean that the genre completely died out though. There were still some interesting bands and artists experimenting with this type of music during the 90s and 2000s. Most of them failed to reach any commercial success, but have garnered a cult following in the underground. In this short video, I decided to handpick 5 examples of post-punk from the post-Soviet region that I think might be of interest. And before anyone comments, no, this video does not contain Mocha Domo or God forbid Buyarak. Okay, let's begin. Every genre, scene, and era has one artist that embodies it the most. Siberian punk is Igor Letov, early Leningrad school is Grebenshikov, you get the idea. If I had to decide which artist embodied post-punk in 90s Russia, it was probably Roman Sidorov, the creator of bands such as Fatal, Sedativ, Starukamha, and most remembered, Der Golem. Sidorov's projects all vary in genres and choice of instrumentation, but there is one key characteristic which ties them all together, that being complete and utter darkness. Sidorov composed some of the most atmospheric and gloomy instrumentals in all Russian post-punk history. Despite Sidorov making some of the most cult music in the Russian underground, the life and background behind this composer remains mostly a mystery. This is due to Sidorov's shut-in character and early death due to suicide. Sidorov's family and colleagues mainly remain silent, but thanks to a small handful of retrospectives, a basic story can be retold. Sidorov was born on the 6th of February 1974 in the city of Frязино. This place is located in the Moscow Oblast. Sidorov's first band was called Bardcore, atypical for its time lowbrow lo-fi punk band. The band recorded 2 albums, but they only hold historical value to our story. The real story of Roman Sidorov starts in the late 90s with the creation of the band Fatal. The band was formed by Sidorov with another Bardcore member, Evgeny Solovyov. The band would recruit a Moscow-born keyboard player, Evgeny Varanovsky, to play with them. At the time, Varanovsky helped out his friends in a local progressive rock band, but that was far from the music that he wanted to play. Sidorov and Varanovsky would soon bond thanks to their love for all kinds of dark music. Originally, Sidorov started out as a metalhead. He was an avid fan of death metal in particular. However, with time, Sidorov started gravitating to other genres such as industrial, post-punk, trip-hop, and also experimental music like IDM. Varanovsky was interested in very similar kinds of music. Solovyov had a more conventional taste out of the 3, with the only music uniting him to the other 2 being 80s melancholic post-punk such as The Cure. With the influences and styles sorted out, our trio went on to record their first demo, which ended up being their only known work. Sidorov came up with the name Fatal because he liked the universality of the word, stating that the word can be found in multiple languages. Fatal recorded 5 songs which would make up their 20-minute EP titled Лёгкие цветы. The sound was a mix of light trip-hop sadness with slowcore melancholy and post-rock ambience. The band used old poetry for lyrics, in particular that of Konstantin Balmont. Varanovsky had a massive collection of books at home where Sidorov would go and pick out the best possible poems for the music. Although the EP turned out to be really good in my personal opinion, the band had flaws with Sidorov's vocals. This concern would be confirmed when the band sent their tape to some sort of industrial alternative music competition where the judges criticized the work, specifically pointing out the weak vocals of Sidorov. Inner conflict sprang up in the band due to Sidorov's interests clashing with the other members. Sidorov considered himself to be the mastermind of Fatal, but Varanovsky and Solovyov felt otherwise. As a result of Sidorov's worsening relations with the band and his vocals supposedly diminishing Fatal's artistic potential, Sidorov was kicked out of his own band. It was 2 Evgenis versus 1 single Roman. This really hurt Sidorov emotionally, but there was nothing that could be done but continue marching on. For context, Fatal tried working without Sidorov, but nothing ever worked out and the project died shortly after. In the late 90s, Japanese noise band Government Alpha came to Russia. There at the show was Sidorov and old Fatal colleague Varanovsky. The Japan noise legends played a great show during which they even let Sidorov join them and scream a little in the microphone. Apparently, I'm not sure if this is true or not, there at the show Roman met his wife Alia. This is where the project Sedativ starts. The project belonged to Sidorov's wife who played guitar. Sidorov helped out with the vocals and bass guitar. Ex-Fatal member Evgeny Varanovsky was helping out on the keyboard and Alia's brother helped out with the drum machine. The exact story about what happened to Sedativ is a mystery since the band never released any music during Roman's life. It was only after Sidorov's untimely death that these songs would be found when scavenging through his belongings. The 2 known Sedativ works include the self-titled EP and the bootleg compilation simply titled 2002 to 2003. At the time of Sidorov's death, most songs didn't even have a name to themselves. Lyrics for the songs were taken from classic poets as in Fatal. This time around it was William Blake and Alexander Blok, for example. Either way, the music on Sedativ turned out to be really good and more straightforward in nature. This is mostly due to the band's music being done by Alia instead of Sidorov, who at the time had a different project on his mind. And so, we come to Sidorov's most legendary band, Der Golem. Teamed up with Dmitry Zubov, who Roman played with in Bardcore, the two would create one of the most chilling and cold albums in Russian post-punk history, titled Zmet. The band's name came from a Gustav Meyrink book. Like one other famous Russian artist who passed away too early, Sidorov got interested in occult literature during his last couple of years. Writers such as Aleister Crowley had a massive influence on the music and aura surrounding the band. Right from the start of the first few notes of the iconic opening track Niet, the listener is transferred into a completely different dimension, like a post-apocalyptic wasteland covered in snow and old run-down commie blocks. An extremely surreal and original release. album was recorded in the basement of some abandoned factory place instead of a professional studio. There was also another great Sidorov project called Starucha, but that's a completely different genre and story, so I will leave it at that. Both their Golem and Fatal can be found on streaming services such as Spotify. Sedativ can be found on YouTube. Living in Georgia during the 1990s was tough to say the least. Despite the difficulties, beautiful music was made in the country at the time. Even during times of war, a lot of young Georgian teens started getting together in various basements in the country to play and record music together. A lot of them played post-punk oriented music. Some of the big names include Teleskopi, Recepti, who were one of the older bands with roots going back to the Soviet days, Serili Omarali, and the band that I want to focus on the most called Plakqsa. Although Plakqsa only released one album and have openly shown no interest in trying to reach a major audience, their music is still remembered and revered by Eastern European music lovers to this day. Plakqsa's frontman is Max Machivariani. During the late Soviet years and early 90s, Max and his friends would spend their days collecting various tapes and listening to them together. This included bands such as Bauhaus, Dead Kennedys, and The Cure, who had a special influence on the band. From the Soviet side, Plakqsa noted the St. Petersburg band Auktion as a major influence. Turning to music was a normal and logical thing to do for the Georgian youth. As Max would put it in an interview, there were only two real options back then: grab a weapon and go die in a war, or stay locked in the basement and jam. Plakqsa was formed when Max and company realized that they were capable of playing the kind of music that they enjoyed and adding something new to it. Plakqsa's spot was called the Theater Basement. That's where the band did their music and played shows. The name itself wasn't random either. Plakqsa's music had a really surrealistic and otherworldly feeling that the band considered to be theatrical. Theatrical in a dreamy, stylish gothic way, not an overblown kitsch like early Agatha Christie, for example. Think Phantom of the Opera, but with Robert Smith and Julie Cruz taking on the composer role. Max recalled how a lot of the music and imagery came from his dreams, bringing parallels to David Lynch even. The music world of Plakqsa is really dreamy. It's not angry or depressing. It's the sound of a stranded, curious alien who's walking through endless hallways and doors, where at every end a new weird creature awaits. A dark, gothic Alice in Wonderland of sorts.
Как-то сжёг не стынет, плач и страх, резкий взмах, и я сегодня скажу ей прощай.
Plakqsa released only one album titled Dreams, and that was pretty much the end. Despite the rich musical culture that was happening in Tbilissi's basements, life outside wasn't kind to people such as Max. Max recalled in an interview that going outside with earrings or tattoos was already seen as taboo and dangerous. Max would even take higher risk wearing lipstick and androgynous dresses. The best case scenario was getting beaten up, worst case getting killed on the street. Plakqsa stayed around in Tbilisi for a couple more years, played a concert in Russia's rock capital, St. Petersburg, but in 1999, Machivariani decided that it was time to migrate. Plakqsa ceased to exist as Machivariani went to the United States. He would spend 10 years living there, returning to Tbilisi in 2011. Upon returning to Tbilisi, Max would reform Plakqsa again. Max continues playing music and is very good. His old contrarian anti-establishment character still shows, such as a time when his new reincarnation of Plakqsa were complimented for sounding professional on a TV show set, to which Max and his band members purposely detuned all the instruments to sound bad and unprofessional. You can find Plakqsa's music on streaming services such as Spotify, as well as a lot of videos on YouTube. Mать Tereza was formed in Michurinsk, which is in Tambov Oblast. The band's roots go back to the very early 90s, when Alexander Nektov and friends befriended a young guy by the name of Mike Mortazin. Mike Mortazin had just returned from getting an education in St. Petersburg, back then still Leningrad. While in Leningrad, Mike got interested in the local punk scene, bands such as the Automatic Satisfiers and folk punk legends Nol, for example. Meanwhile in Michurinsk, Alexander Nektov was listening to a bunch of unknown Soviet post-punk and western indie bands. Combining elements of stylish lo-fi indie and humorous charisma of Len punk, the band Nebesnaya Kosmonavtika was formed. The band quickly garnered buzz in their hometown but would soon stop existing due to Mike getting killed. The lineup started changing constantly and using a band name that was created by Mike was deemed wrong by Alexander. So, Nebesnaya Kosmonavtika changed their name to Mать Tereza. The band that we know today was born. The music changed drastically also. If Nebesnaya Kosmonavtika was a light-hearted, fun teen punk band, Mать Tereza was a dark, serious band with influences stemming far more from post-punk and gothic rock than indie or straightforward punk. So basically, Alexander had pulled the reverse Joy Division in a way. Alexander had long ascended beyond the typical post-punk canon of bands such as Bauhaus and The Cure, instead name-dropping bands such as Eyeless and Gaza and Iron Curtain in interviews. When it came to Russian bands, Alexander preferred the underground bands such as Hugo Ugo, Matroska Tishina and Cocktail Molotov to the typical Kino starter pack. All three legendary cult bands that I will make a video on sometime later for sure. In the mid-90s, Alexander would spend most of his time looking for a place to rehearse and record music. Wandering endlessly in his hometown, at one point Alexander would end up living and rehearsing in a place dubbed the Iconic Basement, which was located in a morgue. This was a popular music spot for all the outcasts and weirdos in the Moscow region. Alexander would mention in an interview how a ton of people would go there, including a certain Sidorov. I wonder who that might be. In 1998, Mать Tereza would release their debut album called Crisis Genre. Let's just say that the atmosphere of the morgue had left its print on the band's sound. This is some deadly cold and dark music. No dreaminess of Plakqsa or spookiness of their Golem. This is cold, harsh realism of life transferred through minimalistic post-punk. Mat Tereza continues to play music to this day. The band's most well-known album is Illusia, which was released in 2002. This is mostly linked to the fact that the song Pamять got rediscovered by Russian Zoomers who started placing the great Mat Tereza song into cringy Russian doomer video compilations. Although I like Illusia, I would personally recommend the band's first two albums, Queer Genre and Hospice, the most. They are the most dark, expressive, creative, and atmospheric in my personal opinion. You can find most of Mate Tereza's catalog on Spotify, as well as a ton of videos on YouTube. Now, let's go back to Georgia and talk about another great underground band called Children's Medicine. This short-lived band that only existed for 2 years left us with one of the most eccentric and fun post-Soviet alternative albums in my opinion. Due to the band's short lifespan, there isn't much to talk about except for the fact that this is really good music. The songs are sung in English, and the music is extremely varied. A mix of light psychedelia such as Vostochny Syndrome, Talking Heads grooviness, electronic experimentations, pop melodicism of bands such as In Excess, and obviously some Joy Division darkness. Can't go anywhere without that. If Georgian viewers know any more information about this project, please let me know in the comments below.
Expressive curves around your house depends on an aim dancer. Position of an aim dancer is always around.
Children's Medicine can be found on YouTube as well as social media websites such as VK. Alternativnaya Kosmonavtika is one of the greatest classic indie Kazakh bands of the 1990s. The band was formed in the city of Almaty, a city that the band would never leave during its lifespan. Perhaps this is the reason as to why Alternativnaya Kosmonavtika mostly remains a Kazakh exclusive band when it comes to popularity. The music scene in 90s Almaty was very varied and big, so leaving the city wasn't needed unless your hypothetical band wanted to capture the hearts of music listeners across the entire post-Soviet region. Anyway, back to the band's story. Alternativnaya Kosmonavtika was formed in the early 90s. The band's main frontman was Sergei Bugaev, not to be confused with Leningrad's Africa. Besides Sergei, there was also Andrei Azurbayev. The two would write most of the songs and lyrics for the band. The genre that Sergei first fell in love with was electronic music. In particular, Jean-Michel Jarre, Vangelis, and Klaus Schulze. After having had some friends travel to Leningrad in the 1980s, Bugaev and all of his Almaty friends would receive fresh tapes of UK post-punk legends such as The Cure, Bauhaus, and Joy Division. Bugaev found this sort of rock music much more interesting and engaging than the popular at the time Beatles and Rolling Stones. Besides post-punk, Bugaev was also really into progressive rock, especially King Crimson, Van der Graaf Generator, and solo Brian Eno albums. The band's first experiments, as typical for many Soviet and post-Soviet bands, revolved around home-recorded acoustic performances, but soon the band started adding some electricity to their music. The band's early material was pretty straightforward punk rock, with naughty words and protest energy. The band started branching out into something more interesting really soon though. The albums Zemlya v Illuminatori and Другое Небо are the most interesting to my ear, a sort of mix of Leningrad's ascended bard rock romanticism, Siberian punk thugginess, and energetic Kazakhstan garage punk charisma.
Слепая фея вывела меня за порог. Я слишком глуп, я никудышный игрок. Я опять проиграл. Значит, я еще не умер. Полиция нравов давно охотится за мной. Полиция нравов давно охотится за мной. Я танцую на крыше, и меня душит снег. Но я вернулся в свой дом у начала всех рек. И как мертвый котенок я ничтожен и мал. И зима побеждает, наступает финал.
As Bugaev had put it in one of the interviews, if Yegor Ledov tried to create the worst sound possible using high-quality gear, Alternativnaya Kosmonavtika attempted to make something beautiful on the cheapest, worst equipment available. As a result of this, Alternativnaya Kosmonavtika had a sort of timeless lo-fi sound to their music. There is something really 60s about their songs. I could imagine these melodies being performed by Californian psych and garage rock bands at that time. The band's lineup changed all the time, with Bugaev being the only original member to stick it to the end. Andrei Azerbayev left the band in 1995. The band would continue playing shows until Sergei Bugaev's death in 2002. With the band's main composer gone, Alternativnaya Kosmonavtika stopped existing. You can find Alternativnaya Kosmonaftika's music on VK, and some songs are available on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the selection for today. If you liked this video and want to see more short lists with obscure post-Soviet bands, please drop a like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.